Hey yo, what a div, y'all. Let's get right into it. I'm here today because I came to an epiphany recently. It was late last night, but it was too late for me to record because I was just bone tired and I was about to lay down. So I told myself I was going to talk about this morning when I woke up, and it's the fact that rares don't matter. Now, you're probably thinking, well, duh, that's why we take them off the filter. No, but I mean, they really just don't matter. Like, rare drop items barely matter anymore in the current state of PoE. And while I've had this thought for a long time, I've never been able to properly formulate all of my thoughts around it because, well, technically speaking, they have a little bit of use in the early stages of the game, right? You know, that Eater Exart progression when you're picking up rares, and they're kind of useful, and maybe they roll with some decent resistances to mildly improve your character real quick. Like, it happens all the time. And so I was hesitant to say, like, oh yeah, rares don't really matter like that anymore, at least on the floor, right? And then I played this private league. I made this league, and I feel like I'm locked in on the thought now. The idea is simple. PoE as a game has evolved to have so many crafting currencies available at so many points in the game before they've ever, like, you know, earlier and earlier than they've ever been, as well as other methods of getting items that don't require you to show a deluge of shitty items on the floor all the time in order to still get massive upgrades. And as a result, floor drop rares are trash. Now, before I dig deeper, let me give you the usual reminder. Hey, look, if you fuck with the video, like, comment, maybe even subscribe. And if you do subscribe, turn the notifications on so you know when we're posting more on the channel. Now, let's dive into this thought some more. This deluge of rares is really the catalyst for both halves of my thought here. When I first came up with the private league idea, it was kind of just offhanded. A friend suggested it to me and I was like, oh yeah, I have always thought about doing this. And then I set off on the challenge of, like, how do you solve some of the early game progression problems that open themselves up before you have, like, access to gearing currency. And then I realized all you have to do is get gearing currency. You just reverse the order, right? Instead of rushing 2 stones, then getting your gearing currency, play like motherfuckers in the gauntlet. Get your gearing currency first, then go get your 2 stones. And that realization kind of blew the lid off of this idea for me, because there's so many ways to gear right now. Like, you think about it for a second, right? Back in the day when when the Vision TM came to be, in this, like, world where drop items are supposed to carry value and weight, things like essences weren't even guaranteeable in your maps, right? Like, I'm talking like the old days. Like, y'all, some of y'all definitely remember when 314 hit, we had essence on the device in tandem with the essence upgrades in Haywork Amulet's Atlas tree. It was a big deal because we got the nodes in 313, but we didn't have the essence on the tree to really see how nuts that was going to be. And then 314, everybody was like, holy shit, you can make so much better gear so quickly now because you just have so many essences all the time. And I think that really becomes like the genesis of this situation. 314, we get that. Also, Ultimatum dropped a lot of decently rolled rares out of its window, like, ignoring the floor loop for a second. The literal window dropped a lot of decent actual rares back then. Nowadays, this is not the case, but back then this was the case. Then we got Expedition, which we all know ROG is Pog, right? So then you get ROG gearing going crazy. We go forward a little bit because the next couple leagues don't really do much of anything with that. You know, Sentinel League had recoms, which is more of an end game thing than an early game thing. And by end game, you don't really need early game rares anyways to, like, function, right? We go a little bit further down the line though, and we start to get into, you know, things that go backwards more than forward. But I think we have to start before we go backwards with 317, right? That was Arc Nemesis League, but more importantly, the introduction of the Atlas passive tree. The Atlas passive tree, especially in its newest iteration, is absurd. The idea that you can force on any mechanic in the game through your Atlas passive tree, pretty much. I think the only mechanic that is not 100% forcible that is present on the tree, but not 100%, is heist. And even that feels pretty close to 100% a lot of the time, right? So now you get to really tap into the power of not only essences and expedition, but there's still betrayal and there's still harvest, right? There's so much power in crafting currency that we have unlimited access to. Map sustain is easier than it's ever been. You have access to be able to farm these materials whenever the hell you want to. And so it begged the question, what purpose do rares actually serve when they drop on the floor? This is ignoring specialty rares, by the way, because specialty rares, obviously, such as veiled items and fractured items and whatnot, still hold a lot of value. And funnily enough, in No Magic and Rare League, you actually still get fractured items because they just drop pre-scoured. They get scoured on drop, and then suddenly it's a magic fractured item, right? So even those aren't gone. Veiled items get fucked on, but there are some solutions to get around that as well. And so what you actually land on is that the idea that we've been playing the game dropping trash ass currency for far too long, or trash ass gear, my bad, for far too long unnecessarily. And this video is now going to take two separate branches, right? This first branch here is actually going to be my experience with not having to deal with this trash, because it's one of the biggest like upsides to this privately for me. It was a pain in the ass to figure out how to do the progression earlier on at first, thinking about like how do you actually get gear with like resistances in the campaign, especially because you just aren't dropping rares, and you know, actually relying on the fucking quest line rares was hilarious to me, right? But it was a solution to the problem. And then you get to mapping and your filter is so clean. Like the only reason I even still see so much things is because I keep forgetting to go take off a lot of the bases that I'm seeing right now, because I no longer really need to see them either. I got my initial batch of bases that I wanted to craft on, and that was it. I don't have to keep fishing to see if a rare is going to ID decent. For the most part, you have stuff like Delirium, which drops rare items from its like tile rewards for armor and jewelry, for example. For some reason that's a thing. Or like, you know, if I go into Heist and I pop a curio, it will give me a nicely rolled rare item. But for the most part, I'm just dropping bases and currency. And that's all PoE really has become. It is just bases and currency, which made this experience extremely refreshing for me. And it was echoed to me by a friend of mine who also played in the league. The idea that you really only do need bases and currency to play the game. And so now let's take the second step into this and just look at like, what do they actually do and how I solved some of those problems to really like drive home how little you actually need dropped rares on the floor. The biggest thing that dropped rares are actually good for is an early currency. One of the biggest things that I did notice is that my supply of alts in particular in the earlier stages of the game was a lot lower than I'm used to. Similarly, chance orbs were a little rough and whatnot, but like really the alts is where I felt it. And that's fine. There are plenty of sources for farming alts. Tujin, for example, right? That will get around this. Or if you're really, really desperate, blue altars drop a lot of alterations if you're willing to click all of them one by one. Fuck that, but it does, right? Okay, now what about gear? What about the early potential of getting a nice like 80 res 70 life ring or something, right? Like, what about that? I mean, well, cope. But again, I mentioned there's a ton of crafting mechanics in the game, right? Harvest, essence, delve if you want to go that far, but I think that's a little bit of a stretch earlier on in the league. So essence, harvest for sure. You can get them out of ROG. Gwen in gambling can get you rares. That might roll well. Faustus was added this league that, like, when he rolls rares, rolls a lot of pretty decently well-rolled items, right? Shipments bring you back rares. So what do you actually need the dropped rares for if it's not just the vendoring currency? And that's the thing. You don't. Playing this league has made me realize that rares can really come off your filter so much sooner than I ever thought they could, because I always just kind of forget about it and I keep coping on it. And like, if you're in trade, there's a little bit of value on coping on them for an extra day just to see if you ID like a 20C item real quick to jumpstart some extra currency. But otherwise, dude, they're fucking pointless. Not pointless, but pointless. You know what I mean? Like, exaggerative pointless. And to that end, what this means is that if you want to play PoE 1, you are a crafter. You don't really have a choice in the matter unless you are explicitly a trade only player who has no interest in interacting with what is no longer one of the more advanced systems in the game. And that might ruffle some feathers a little bit, but like crafting in this game is no longer the extremely prestigious and highly gatekept set basis of information that it once was. Because so much of the crafting that you should be doing in progression now is so low level accessible. Here's a really good example of what I mean. You're in red maps and you're fucking terrified because you have negative 60 res. Did you take rings and toss them into the harvest bench with Reforged Chaos? You might be thinking, what does that do? Well, rings only have chaos res as a suffix. In fact, actually, your armor also falls under this exact same rule. If you need chaos res so bad, take a base, slam it with some Reforged Chaos until it gets good chaos res and other stats that you want. You want something better than that? Maybe you're looking for some suppression? Well, first of all, IDing suppression is cope anyways. Get to alt rolling. Or more importantly, did you visit ROG? Hell, did you visit Vostis? Both of them probably could hook you the fuck up, right? Oh, you need a weapon that's better? Did you bust out the essences? No? Time to boot up some essences then. Trying to make a cluster? You got some harvest juice? No? You got some fossils on hand? Yeah? You got some scours and some alks or some chaos orbs on hand? Get to work, right? You no longer actually drop the items you need. And that's always been the case in the mid to end game, but I'm noticing that in the early game as well, if you just slow down a little bit, right? Which, let's be real here, if you're watching me, you're probably not the fastest of players. It's not that I'm not a fast player and I don't attract good players or anything, but let's just be real for a second. The average player does not play at Ben pace, at Jung Run pace, even at my pace, quite frankly. It's always crazy to me to realize that like I'm kind of above average in that regard, and it kind of fucks me up every time I realize it. But like, if you're not playing at breakneck pace, who cares if it takes you 2 additional hours to kill your Eater Exarch if your character walks into Eater Exarch at 4.5 million DPS and you just blow them the fuck up and get to moving, right? Like, that's perfectly fine. That's what you saw in the footage for my power stepping character the other day, right? I took some time, farmed out some extra gear on the character because I was figuring out how this system all worked out together. And then I just kind of walked into Eater Exarch with about 3 times as much damage as I traditionally walk in there with and just blew the bosses up. That's fine. And you can do that because of how powerful crafting currency in the game is. And now, if you want me to expand on this thought further, let me know in the comments, because I'm more than happy to make like separate videos really talking about the strength of the various crafting currencies to really like hit this point home. And I think it's interesting to talk about this at such a point in time right now, because we're on, you know, PoE 2 is on the horizon, right? I'm pretty sure everybody knows month and a half from now, we're going to be going into the PoE 2 early access, which means that we're going to be playing a completely different game, really, right? A lot of the feedback that I heard from the various playtest events that they've invited creators out to is that drops matter, right? Like, you know, the idea that, you know, the dropped items actually feel good. And it's a thing that they talk about in the interviews and during like ExileCon, for example, and whatnot. But the reality is that, well, A, will this actually hold true when we get to the end game that we know nothing about? But 2, more importantly, let's assume that it does hold true. It creates a very interesting dichotomy in play between the 2 games, where PoE 1 is a creator's paradise and PoE 2 is a looter's paradise. And I think that's actually really cool. If you can get, if the 2 games actually properly stroke different parts of the game, and PoE 1 continues to embrace the fact that it's not that type of game, right? Like, it's very important to emphasize here that PoE 1 has to continue embracing that it's not a looter's paradise of a game. Not in terms of the items you pick up on the floor. The currencies and whatnot, yeah, sure. But for the most part, you're not picking up rares and being excited. You're picking up rares and wondering why they're still on your filter. And as long as they never like deviate from this understanding, I think we're in a fantastic place where both games have strong identities in the space. And that's extremely exciting, you know. So let me know some of your thoughts on that in the comments down below. I think that wraps it up for me here. I just wanted to put this out there because I've, you know, had this thought simmering around for years, quite frankly. And now that I, you know, have been making videos and I'm doing a private league that kind of illuminates me to this once more, I felt like it was finally time to talk about it. and, you know, get ready to open up some other discussions in the related area. Alrighty. That's it for me. If you want to hear more from me, you know, again, subscribe with notifications on, you know, get this video around for people to talk about it, all that good stuff. If you want to see me live on stuff, there's a Twitch and a Discord in the description down below to connect with me further. Discord, I'm actually pretty active in. Like, if you ask questions or chat there, I will say hi to you. You can come say hi to me. It's a cool time. Or you can come see me when I'm streaming. My stream is not always PoE, just a heads up, because we're in a kind of a lull period. So I'm like bouncing back and forth between streaming the private league and streaming other games that I find interesting at the time. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. But anyways, thank you guys for watching and listening, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.